Every time I'm joysticking my kid, telling him run here, stand here, kick here, pass it, I'm stealing one of those reps. The more reps you steal, the slower they develop. Yeah, you want to steal a lot of reps and joystick them around. You might win more at 10, but you'll probably be out of the game at 16 because we need intelligence on the court, on the field, on the ice, not on the sideline. Sport is becoming this playground for the upper middle class and not the place where every kid, where it's a meritocracy, where everyone has a chance to compete based on their ability. And I think this is really because we've pushed excessive costs and commitments down younger and younger and younger. The problem with our system right now is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those kids you don't select at 8, 9, and 10, it's not like we give them great coaching and equal resources and let them grow. They just get selected right out of the system and never have a chance. So I go to speak at high schools all the time, and there's some 6, 7 kid walking the hall who doesn't play basketball because he got cut in 4th grade. You want your kid to keep playing. I need those officials who are also brand new officials this year to come back next year. So you're not allowed to yell at them. If you don't like that, no problem. Here's your money back. Hit the road.
A lot of people talk the talk when it comes to changing the state of youth sports. Not only has John O'Sullivan walked the walk, he's inspired countless others to do the same. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, and this is Better Sports Parents, a podcast created to help all of us become better sports parents in order to improve the youth sports experience for as many children as possible. Now, it's not the first podcast in this space, but it's the kind of resource that John O'Sullivan certainly appreciates and supports. A former professional soccer player, John has been fighting for change in the youth sports environment for close to 15 years. He's authored 3 books, created a long-running podcast of his own called The Way of Champions, and founded Changing the Game Project, which seeks to educate and empower parents, coaches, and organizations for the betterment of youth sports. John is also the father of 2, a speaker in global demand, and a wealth of information and advice, which he is about to impart to this audience. So please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with John O'Sullivan. First of all, John, thank you very much for doing this and spending some time with us here on Better Sports Parents.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing as well. It's really important, and it's just great to be here with you and talk about, obviously, a topic that's near and dear to both of our hearts.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to hear that there are more people who are finding this topic near and dear to their hearts and wanting to do something about it, in large part due to the work you've been doing for more than a decade. I guess the easiest question to start with from my point of view is, how did you find yourself from someone who saw challenges in the youth sports space to someone who decided, I'm going in and trying to make a change in the youth sports space?
I think it goes back into 2011. And I was pretty burnt out. I was running a youth soccer organization. We had 1,200 kids. My own kids were just getting into playing. They were that age, right? And they were also the age where they noticed that dad wasn't home on nights and weekends because he was out coaching all the time. But I wanted for my own club like a good parent education program. I saw parents sort of losing the plot of what mattered. And I was like, where's just like a little plug and play that I can give them this information so they understand the pathway and what can be there. And I looked and I couldn't really find it. And I had always wanted to write a book. And so I decided to put pen to paper on my first book, which became Changing the Game. And the publisher was like, hey, that's great. You wrote a book. Like, how are you going to let people know you have a book? And I was like, well, I don't know. And they're like, why don't you start a blog or something? So the blog became Changing the Game Project, became a podcast with Jerry Lynch called Way of Champions. But it was the blog that first sort of jumped in and led to TED Talk and everything that blew up after that. But yeah, it was really just this desire of, I want more good information for myself. And I wish I had something that I could hand to parents that I could bring in to my club to just to help parents be better and understand what's helping, what's not. Some and then as I got into it, right, it was learning about the perils of early sports specialization and patience and how people grow and develop and things like talent and what is talent really and what is it not and all sorts of things that I think if more people understood and then had a platform to work from, they could provide better experiences for their kids.
We're certainly lockstep on that. When you say you saw parents losing the plot, what did that look like to you? I think most of us might have a feeling, but what did it look like to
You
you?
know, acting out of great love for their child but feeling very panicky, right? Like, I got to force my kid to do this extra camp and then this extra camp and then this because everyone else is doing it. And if I don't do it, my kid's going to fall behind, right? Instead of understanding the athlete development pathway and that, how much motivation and love of the game matters. Sideline behavior, right? Yelling and screaming and joysticking their kids around the field instead of letting them make decisions and letting the game belong to them. Obviously, over the top sideline behavior, which we didn't really see very much in our club, but certainly saw with opponents of treatment of officials and parents yelling at each other or opposing kids and things like that. Just like, man, this is going down a bad direction. I think ultimately 99% of parents, right, they're thinking long term. I don't think most parents are like, my kid's going to get a scholarship and go be a star. They just want their kid to be healthy, but they weren't really following game day behaviors, nor were they following long term behaviors that were going to lead to that.
So, one of the behaviors you mentioned there is one that I think is so natural for parents. They may not realize that it's detrimental to their child's development. And that's what you call joysticking their child around the field when they're shouting instruction. Again, I think it's very natural. Parents want their child to succeed. They know their child doesn't understand the game that they're playing yet. And so they shout, shoot, or pass. Why does that have a detrimental effect on the child as he or she is looking to develop in the sport?
Well, if you think about a perception action sport like soccer, basketball, lacrosse, right, any invasion sport, um, what happens in a split second, right, is that the athlete has to perceive what's happening around them, come up with, well, what are the solutions to this problem, choose one, then technically execute that choice, then assess their execution and their choice and do it again. So you can't actually take outside input in the middle of where am I going to pass or where am I going to shoot. Those decisions have to be on your own. And the only way that kids get better, right? If I want my 8-year-old to be good at 16, he or she has to have thousands and thousands of repetitions of that decision making and execution process, perception, action, perception, action. Every time I'm joysticking my kid, telling him run here, stand here, kick here, pass it, I'm stealing one of those reps. And so I like the analogy of the weight room, right? If you have a trainer who trains you and you go to the weight room and they do all 10 reps on the bench press, you're not getting any stronger even though you're watching bench pressing, right? Like you have to do the reps, you have to do the hard part. And so this is I think what we really need our people to understand is the more reps you steal, the slower they develop. Yeah, you want to steal a lot of reps and joystick them around. You might win more at 10, but you'll probably be out of the game at 16 because we need intelligence on the court, on the field, on the ice, not on the sideline.
The reason I think is very good intention for most people. They want their child to succeed and they feel it's a way to show support. With all the work you've done, what does positive parental support from the stands or the sideline actually look like?
It includes cheering, number one, right? Cheer, be present. But like I said, don't joystick, don't make decisions for them, but be present for them. I think it's modeling good behavior. When the referee makes a bad call, um, modeling, get on with the next play. Don't be sitting there yelling at the referee who, right, is probably 13 years old when your kid's little, right? It's things like that, and then certainly, helping your kids take the big picture perspective of the game. So I think all these things really are just, if I take the long term view, then that includes short term failures, short term losses, but I'm constantly focused on engagement and love of the sport. And then eventually they take over themselves and they develop intrinsic motivation to keep going. And that's the key, right? Enjoyment and ownership and intrinsic motivation, that's what keeps kids in sport, and that's what keeps them getting better. So if we steal the enjoyment, or if we steal the ownership of it, then intrinsic motivation never appears.
Part of the reason I think these conversations are so important, I know certainly as I have learned over the last number of months and years, every time I get a piece of information from someone like yourself or anyone else in the youth sports space, I go, oh, yeah, I can identify that behavior myself. And that doesn't mean that
Me
I
too.
consider myself so, yeah. And that's it. Someone who has ever, gone after a referee verbally. But yes, I have been the parent who's in the stands when my kids were young saying shoot or pass because I thought that was proper support until I learned different. And there are a bunch of different behaviors. As you started to explore this space, or as you started to coach your own kids, did you notice those behaviors in yourself as you began to do the work?
Sure. Every time I do a talk for a sports club or a school, and I talk to the parents, I say anything I talk about right now, I've screwed up numerous times, right? So it's not there's no such thing as a perfect parent, and so much of what we deal with is gray. But yeah, I mean, one of the things, they obviously, there's research even behind this, when they ask children what are the bad memories, and they talk about the car ride home and the post game experience. Yeah, I've had my kids in tears in the car because I felt the need to say something in that moment, or I was frustrated with the way my kids were competing and I said something to them during the game or whatever. So yeah, I mean, we all do this, and we do it out of love. But sometimes out of love, we do things that aren't necessarily helpful to our kids, right? So, in that first book, Changing the Game, I talked about, right in the beginning, you need like a youth sports mission statement. What is the purpose of sport for our family, right? And what is the long-term goal? So at 25, what do I want my son or my daughter to be like because of sports? And then work backward from there. And then ask yourself over and over, is this experience leading to that future vision? Or am I just winging it every 6 months, chasing the Joneses, doing all this stuff, doing things that aren't going to lead to that hopefully physically, mentally, emotionally healthy human being who has learned to do hard things, has learned to face adversity and solve problems and be a leader and all that. Like, that's what I think most parents would say they want. Well, are today's actions leading towards that future child? And if not, that's when you have to reassess.
No question about it. And part of our habits that we have formed as parents come from the ones that we got from our own parents and the upbringing we had. What was your relationship with your parents like relative to sport? What was their approach?
So both my parents passed away in the last year and a half, and so I've written a blog about each of them and their influence on me. My dad was the coach. He was an Irish Catholic guy from the Bronx. He was a fireman. He was hard driving. He was competitive. When he said you did well, you knew you did well, right? I never liked the coaches who was always like, "Oh, that was great today, John." When you knew inside, like, that wasn't great. I wasn't good today. So my dad was a truth teller, but he loved you and his intent was there. And in my case, it was always my goals, my dreams. And he said, how can I support them? He never took that over. And my mom was, as I wrote in the article when she passed, she was my number one fan. She loved you no matter what. She knew very little about sports, didn't care, just was happy that I was out there. And so it was always great that, in the moments that I needed to be better, I could go to my dad. And the moments I needed to feel better, I could go to my mom. And so it was they were a perfect sport parenting pair.
That's fantastic. And obviously, it led to long term athletic success for you. I'm sure it's not the only thing, but the environment that they created was a part of that. Did you play multiple sports? Obviously, you starred in soccer, but what was your background like as far as diversity of sport?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 53, right? So I grew up on Long Island, playing seasonally, with my buddies in school, and we'd all probably play rec soccer in the fall, and then in the winter, maybe in the basketball league. And I was a wrestler for many years. I loved wrestling, played baseball, learned to play golf. We would play pond hockey back then because the pond would still freeze and the lawyers hadn't closed it, right? So yeah, you were always doing something, right? You were always out in the neighborhood doing something. And it really wasn't until high school where you're kind of like, I was playing club soccer, and doing all this other stuff, but it was then it was like, okay, maybe soccer is my path. But of my group of friends, others played college soccer. One was a wrestler. Two of them played golf. One played ice hockey. Like, we all had different paths that we pursued, but we did tons of stuff together. So yeah, I had that multi-movement youth, which I think is really, really important. And then when I decided that it was soccer, I decided that, not my dad for me, not my mom for me. I decided it. It's so much harder for kids now because they're really forced at 8 or 9 to go down this path or try to balance two paths. And the amount of money and time that they've spent by the time they're 13 or 14 was way different than when I was growing up.
Yeah, certainly the same sort of thing for me. It was a much different sport environment, and sport as a business was not really a thing when I was growing up. At least that's not the community I took part in, or if that was happening elsewhere. I want to get to where we're at today in a minute, but I still think it's very impactful to talk about how you came to where you were. You chose soccer, it was your choice. Was it clear for others on the outside, oh, John's the soccer star, he's the best player, that's where his path is going to be? Or were you simply one of the strong players in that sport?
Yeah, certainly. I think I was one of, not the, right? And I was a late bloomer. Like, I really didn't, grow until I was like 15, 16. I mean, in eighth grade, I wrestled at 98 pounds. And in the senior in high school and freshman of college soccer, I was 170, right? So it was like I was a late bloomer. So athletically, I was behind. I was a November birthday. So I was young, or I was old for my grade in school, but young in club sports. So no, there was lots of good players. Once I got to high school, right, then I went to a big Catholic high school on Long Island with tons of good players. I mean, I think I had 12 Division 1 players on my team, and one of them played 60 games for the U.S. national team. And it's like, so I remember going to tryouts my freshman year of high school, and there's like 90 freshmen out there, and there's 7 spots on JV, and I'm like, oh man. And that's when I decided I don't think I can do this for soccer and baseball. And that's when I decided that soccer was my thing. So yeah, no, I mean, I think I was a good athlete who did lots of things and then just stuck with it and kept getting better and kept getting better. And when I was really kind of coming into my own, my junior year of high school, I'd grown, I was stronger, I was faster, I was better. And then I had a really bad injury the summer before my senior year. I broke my tib fib and, was out for 12 months. And that was a really hard time because you don't come back where you were, you come back where you used to be. And that was a really, really tough time for me personally because I saw people surpass me who I was passing by. And I obviously missed my senior year of high school, which was such a bummer, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was a tough time. So it took a long time to get through that. And it wasn't until my sort of junior and senior year of college where I was really sort of competing really well again.
It feels like in today's sporting environment, we're trying to make that selection and identify that athlete so much earlier than the time you're describing, or certainly the time where I grew up. I know it's impossible to say, but if you were to handicap it, would you have been able to get to where you got in today's sporting environment because of the way you developed as an athlete?
It's a great question. Um, I would say probably no, right? And I know lots of people who feel that way. And you're exactly right, Scott. This sort of more, younger. Let's pick the quote talented kids as soon as possible is the worst way to identify long-term talent. It's the worst way to, but because really, usually all you're doing early on is you're picking the oldest kids who are the most developmentally older, right? So the developmental age, and this has been proven in every single sport where they've done research that at prior to almost age 20 for boys, the people who are developmentally older or at least neutral are way overrepresented. But on the professional ranks, it's actually usually the late developers that are overrepresented in the professional ranks, because when you're smaller and slower, you have to be more clever, you have to be more skillful, and you develop grit and resilience because you can't just be bigger, faster, stronger than everyone. The problem with our system right now is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those kids you don't select at 8, 9, and 10. It's not like we give them great coaching and equal resources and let them grow. They just get selected right out of the system and never have a chance. So I go to speak at high schools all the time, and there's some 6, 7 kid walking the hall who doesn't play basketball because he got cut in fourth grade, right? And it's like, come on, man, or some kid who is in fifth grade was the tallest, and his rec coach told him, you play center, just play defense and rebound, don't dribble the ball or whatever, and never looked at that his dad is 5'8" and his mom's 5'4", and now he can't dribble, pass, or shoot because in early on he was told not to dribble, pass, or shoot, right? So our sort of win now early selection system is the worst thing for athletes. And because we have hundreds of millions of people in the US, we can throw 100 eggs against the wall, and if one doesn't break, we go, look how good we are. But in smaller countries, they can't do this, and so they're much better at maximizing talent development.
Talent selection versus talent identification. I read a great blog post that you had on your site, changingthegameproject.com, but not everyone will be familiar with the difference between the two. And I know you alluded to it in that last answer, but if you can explain further, what is talent selection versus talent identification, and why does our current system get this wrong?
I think in that article, and that's going back probably 10 years or more, but I told the story of a Danish soccer player named Simon Kjær. And so at 16, there was a new club called FC Midland started, and they picked their first under 16 team. And all the coaches, UEFA A licensed coaches, picked, their kids, and they had one spot left and no one could decide on it. And so they gave this kid, Simon, the final spot on the team because his dad was the equipment manager, right? But no one thought he should be there. They just gave him the spot. And then what they did, which was really clever, was the director said, all right, I want everyone to put 3 names in an envelope who you think might be a pro at 21. And then 6 years later, they opened them up, and none of them put Simon on there. And Simon was, at that point, had represented Denmark in the World Cup, was playing, I think, in Italy at that time. I mean, he's still a professional footballer, went on to captain his country. And none of these expert coaches at 16 could see that was his future, right? So what we tend to do is we select talent. And what that means is who's the big, fast, strong kid that's going to help me win in the next 6 months, right? In baseball, right? I'm going to let those kids play pitcher and catcher and first base and stick the other kids in deep roving right field and whatever, right? That's talent selection, but talent identification is looking at what are the inputs where is this kid now? Where is he or she developmentally, and how did they get there? And what's their potential future because of this? And we all know all the examples. I told the soccer example, but ice hockey examples, obviously Tom Brady in football, and how many millions and millions of dollars went into that, and they still got it wrong, right? So it's really identification is looking at the inputs and the age and the potential versus just what does this kid give me in this moment right now.
Well, and the real truth from my perspective about talent identification is none of us really know. So we have to try to keep as many in sport as long as possible so that those talents eventually emerge. Because, like you talked about with the reference to the 6'7" player who isn't involved in basketball, I got cut early, so he's not in the sport anymore. And we've eliminated that possibility early. That to me seems like the easiest and most logical North Star in youth sports, that it should always be as many as long as possible. Why do we get away from that?
Sometimes there's some good reasons, which is facilities and things like that, right? I only have so many basketball courts. I only have so many volleyball courts. I only have so many coaches to coach these teams. I only have so many leagues for them to play in. I only have so much ice time, right? So sometimes that is the true limiter of I'd love to have five volleyball teams, but I can only pick two. But then I think really it's more this emphasis on results early on, right? Who cares about the third team or the fourth team? It's only the top two that really matter, right? And then that gets sometimes driven by parents. They think their kid's great. I want my kid grouped with all the other great kids as soon as possible so they can go and win. And I remember years ago I had the author David Epstein on my podcast, and he was living in Brooklyn at the time. He said, John, I look out my window and there's an 8-year-old, I think it was, travel soccer team practicing outside in the park across the street. And they're a travel team. And he's like, and I just find it hard to believe that a group of 8-year-olds can't get a game in a city of 10 million people. Like, what's wrong with us, right? That we need to take that group to New Jersey, to Washington, D.C., to Boston to get a game instead of going, there's 10 million people here. There's thousands and thousands of kids play soccer. Like, let's split them up and let's let these kids have different roles, right? So I just think it's this again, as to use David's words in that story, the cult of the head start, right? Let me get my kid a head. If I have the money and the resources, I'll get my kid a head start. But as David said, think about that in terms of walking, right? You can do everything so your kid walks at 6 months, but everyone else is going to be walking after a year, right? So the head start eventually gets you nowhere. And I think this is what we see in sports a lot is the head start oftentimes is more detrimental than it is helpful.
Well, it's a really good point, and it brings up the conversation around free play as well, because the only place you seem to see those 8-year-olds having that game where there's a bunch of other 8-year-olds is at school recess or at school lunch hour, because they're let outside. There's no structure to it. And they just play. And everybody's involved. The kids who play soccer are playing. The kids who don't play soccer are playing, or basketball, or whatever the sport happens to be. And you and I grew up in a time where free play was certainly more frequent and it was more accessible. I have no idea what happened in between and how we moved completely away from free play, but it feels like it's almost non-existent now. Is there a way we get back to that? Like, what are steps parents can take in their own community to try to get back to that place?
Well, I think I read once the word play date hit the Webster's dictionary in like 1994, right? And this was, at a time where many women were going back to work, and we had people with dual career families. So in what used to be free play time, it was like, okay, well, I need someone to watch my kids, and then if I need someone to watch them, can I organize it? And now free play's gone. And so I think what would happen a lot as well is like, even if I wanted my kid to be the free play kid, there was no one to play with, right? So we almost artificially have to create free play. But what's happened since is that we have devalued play so much that even kids devalue it, right? So I would run a soccer club, and if I did free play Fridays, get a couple people show up. If I did technical skills shooting Friday, it'd be packed, right? And so those parents are saying free play, nah, no good. But oh yeah, my kid's going to get better this Friday, instead of realizing how powerful and important free play is, because the kids make rules and solve problems and try things without a coach watching them and coaching them and everything like that. So, I think as a parent, like, number one, if you live on a block with a lot of kids, can you encourage it? Can you get a couple goals and put them out there and give them hockey sticks to play road hockey, or give them a soccer ball and say, go play, and put out some cones so people don't go driving through? I mean, if there's a park nearby, go set it up, because I mean, that's the sad part, right? You go out to the local neighborhood park and there's no one on the baseball diamond unless it's an organized practice, right? And I think in the US, it's the only sport that I still see sort of pick up is basketball, right? You still see that at the community park, but just not many kids out there just playing pickup soccer or pickup whatever. And it's usually adults playing pickup basketball.
Well, and when you talk to adults, and I don't think this is every parent, but I do think one of the refrains that comes back is, well, kids are different now and they've got screens and they're more interested in that. My belief is that kids aren't any different. I think parents are different. I think that what we've created around the kids is different, because I think if kids have an opportunity, as I said, I see it at lunch hours, I see it at recesses, they will go play. How do you view that? Is it the fault of the screens? Is it kids being different? Is it the environment we've set up?
I think it's all of the above, right? Certainly, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt says, until 2012, kids were raised in a play-based environment. Now they're raised in a phone-based environment. So when we hand our child a screen every time they're bored, we're doing them such a massive, massive disservice, because boredom is where creativity comes from. Boredom is where you make up the game. Boredom is where you pick up the crayons and draw the picture, or dabble on the guitar or the piano or things like that. So letting your children be bored is one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids, because then they don't just default to the screen, which gives them the dopamine hit and the pleasure through no effort at all. So kids are different because of that: shorter attention spans, anxiety when they're not around their devices. And I think if most parents ask themselves, right, if you're someone who's on your phone a lot, and I would put myself in that category, I feel anxious when I leave it in my car, or if I leave the house and I forget it. What am I missing or whatever? Well, of course, our kids with a less developed brain are going to feel that as well. So I think, as much as possible, getting devices away. I mean, my goodness, in schools, when schools now are finally saying, put your phone away until the end of the day, support that policy. It's a great thing for your kids. And kids overwhelmingly 2 weeks into it are like, oh, this is so much better. I'm having a conversation at the lunch table today. So all these things, I think, are really, really small decisions that we can make. And again, I'm not a parenting expert, right? But I do know that waiting as long as possible to give your kid a phone is a pretty good thing, and most kids appreciate that. They don't, not in the moment, but eventually. So yeah, we have to create space where they have to come up with something to fill the space that's not electronic. And now you'll see kids go out in the backyard and make up a game, or play 1v1, or get the neighborhood kids together.
You brought up coaching, and it's something that a lot of parents who watch and listen to this podcast can relate to, because maybe they are high level coaches, but in most cases, they're volunteer coaches for their children's sport. And that's what most clubs rely on. For you personally, and you're a trained coach, you're a certified coach at the highest level. What is your general coaching philosophy with the teams you coach, John?
Fun, fun play. It's supposed to be. I mean, the mission statement of Changing the Game project is giving sports back to kids and putting more play and playing ball. So fun is the key, right? As parents, understand fun, or if you don't like the word fun, use the word joy, right? What brings joy? And it's not fooling around, it's not lack of discipline and organization. And every time the research has been replicated, this woman Amanda Visick did this research, right? And kids came up with what she called the 81 fun determinants. And it's things like, working hard, being treated respectfully, getting playing time. God forbid you actually play in the games, right? Good team dynamics, things like that. That's what drives joy. And so as a coach, I'm in charge of the three things that drive the most joy, which is positive coaching, positive team dynamics, and a challenging, organized environment, right? So I own that. And whether I'm a volunteer or a full time professional, yes, I might have different knowledge base, but uh, you know, volunteerism is not an excuse for a lack of professionalism in that regard. And I always tell, and people say, "Oh, but they're volunteers, we can't ask too much." And I always say, my dad was a volunteer firefighter for 57 years. When he couldn't fight fires anymore, he taught firefighting, right? And he was a New York City fireman before that. And when I look at this, I'm like, imagine your house was on fire and the volunteer firefighter showed up and say, well, haven't really learned how to attach the hose yet while your house burns down. No, we expect them as a volunteer to have basic skills. A, so of course they don't get hurt or die, but B, so they can save our house. Well, we're working with children. You have to develop some skills. And so I think it really starts with, if you know nothing, default to joy, and just be organized and do your best and let the game teach. But joy, like, make it fun. Ask yourself at the end of every practice, would I have wanted to be a player in that practice? And if the answer is no, you probably should do something else.
That's a really good question that coaches and parents out there can ask themselves. That's a great tip. And as you talk about how parents should be organized and they should have some skills and a plan in place, I do think that organizations and clubs do a decent part, some better than others, of preparing those volunteer coaches. Hey, here's some of the drills, here's the focus. I do often wonder if those organizations miss how you're supposed to deal with children and how you're supposed to deal with parents.
Yeah,
How do we get them to level up in those areas, John?
I think you're right. And I think, in my experience, many call it grassroots parks and rec departments that are providing multiple sporting programs and tons of extracurricular things for their community. They're overwhelmed. So the person running the fall soccer league and flag football league, once they sign up all these kids, then those people are in charge of finding a coach for all those teams, which often involves sort of dialing for dollars. And, if your name's at the end of the alphabet, you might be the last one on the list. And they're like, all right, if you don't say yes, we don't have a coach and you don't have a team. So they do all that. And then they have their preseason meeting. They give you your balls and your cones and your practice schedule. And then they're on to basketball or volleyball or whatever's next. And they don't oversee the league and what's happening. And they don't teach coaches that, okay, here's your PDF of 20-year-old drills, right? I mean, some are doing better. There's a lot of online great practice things now in every sport. But what they're not doing is teaching those coaches what makes for a great coach, because it's not really knowledge, it's connection, it's relationships. And so those coaches who feel that they don't know enough about a sport need to be made to feel confident that, but do you understand children? Do you understand people? Do you understand why you like your boss or a favorite teacher or a favorite coach? It's because they listened. It's because they connect. It's because they treat you with respect. It's because they give you a voice. All these things everyone is capable of. All these things are skills. and we have to assure coaches that, hey, if you have these things, you're going to do just fine, right? Be a mentor, be a great, relationship for those. And so I think we could just be better at this. And then we, without a doubt, organizations have to protect, maybe a strong word, those volunteer, especially those volunteer, but all their coaches, from parents who are over the top, who just don't get it. So we need parent education, but then we also need parent sideline accountability. And that means being on the sideline, walking over there, saying, that's not okay. You cannot say or do this, right? Like that's not how we do things here. You want your kid to keep playing. I need those officials who are also brand new officials this year to come back next year. So you're not allowed to yell at them. If you don't like that, no problem. Here's your money back. Hit the road, right? This is what we have to be so much better at. And most, I don't know, I can't say most, many organizations abdicate that responsibility because they're just happy they got them signed up and they're all on to the next season and let this one just run itself.
Well, it's a really great point about what the ethos of a club is, and whether you're just putting a nice phrase and mantra on a wall, or whether you're actually living the values that your club is supposed to stand for, and seeing that play out with the teams and the coaches and the children that are in that environment. And you're right, because sport has become such a business, and I'm talking youth sport here, people are very concerned about making sure that that person doesn't walk away with their money. And I would love to see more clubs have the courage to say, okay, we're willing to lose that family or those 10 families if it makes our overall environment better. I do think parents have a role to play here, as you mentioned, that the coaches have to deal with the parents. How do parents unintentionally focus on the wrong things within youth sports?
I mean, we've kind of talked about it a lot, right? It's just there's this knowledge gap of what does good look like, right? So I think first of all, a lot of parents have no idea what what good really looks like. Number two, they're not quite sure why they think their kid is good. Well, if your kid is a head taller than everyone else, this is just a short term, unless you're 6'8", right? It's just a short term thing. They're not going to be a head taller than everyone else for a long time. And also, I mean, Scott, because it feels good to see your DNA do well, right? It feels good to see your kids score a goal or score a bunch of points, or it makes you feel like you're a good parent, but it's not really a great indicator of whether you're a good parent or not. But I get that because I've been there and I feel that. And I felt lousy when my kid screws up, and I feel great when my kid makes the good play that wins the game. Um, so it's again, it goes back to it's done out of love, but just I think it always starts with what's the purpose of this? Why did we put our kids in sports anyway? And if the purpose is X, Y, and Z, then are my actions today leading to that, or are they not?
Well, the way I found you was through your TED Talk in 2014. I know that's a lot of years ago, and you mentioned it earlier in this conversation about how that blew up. And there's a good reason why it blew up, because you certainly educated me, I'm not sure how many months or years ago now, on what I should say to my child after the game. And this is one of the first places I think it happens where that relationship can break down or that focus gets shifted to a place it shouldn't. For those who do not know John, and I'm not going to ask you to do the whole TEDx talk here, but what are the 5 words you should say to your child after the game, and why is it so important?
Well, in the TED, when you do a TED talk, they say have an idea worth sharing, right? And I was about 2 weeks out from the talk, and I recorded like a PowerPoint, recorded it, and sent it to my mom, who at the time was you know 78, 79 years old or whatever, and and she was like, "Oh, that was a nice talk, John, but I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what I should do." Right? And I was like, "Oh, okay, fair enough. I got to fix this." And so, there's a guy in Seattle, Bruce Brown, who was an early mentor of mine. And I saw him speak, and he used to talk about this. And but this is a really big old concept, right? Just tell your kids I love watching you play. Tell your kids I love watching you compete, right? That's how we can start. That no matter the score, no matter what happens, you love your kids. I don't think anyone's signing their kids up and, driving them all over and spending lots of money because they don't love them. But sometimes our words and our actions after a competition can send a different message. So helping them understand that, and then what would you like to go get to eat is just the most important thing. Some kids want to talk about the game after, some don't, but just letting them know that I'm going to love you no matter what. And I a couple years ago, so this great interview with Kobe Bryant, and he talked about this as well. And he said, when I was 11 years old, I didn't score a single point all summer because I was terrible. And my dad said to me, you know what? Whether you score 0 or 60, I'm going to love you no matter what. And he's like, and that gave me the freedom to not be good, to make mistakes. And he's like, but the hell with that, I'm scoring 60, you know? And that freed him to take ownership of this. So making sure that our kids understand that we love them no matter what, good days, bad days, good behavior, bad behavior. I love you, but that's not okay. That's the most important thing. And it's just an easy place that we're all capable of starting.
I agree. And it's a habit that needs to be built. And if you need to almost build yourself a checklist or a mental checklist to go through, I love watching you play. What do you want to eat? Did you have fun? If that's what it needs to be, and it feels like it's verbatim every single week, that's okay as you build the habit. Because I think one of the easiest things to fall into is the car coaching that you mentioned earlier. I know I have done it. I do my best not to do it anymore. But I think even when parents have the right priorities for their kids, which is, hey, I want to see you work hard out there. They're not emphasizing results, but they're emphasizing effort, they're emphasizing fun. It's so easy to fall into because I know this has happened with my own child. I can see she's not giving her best effort that I know she's capable of. I forget that I probably had 100 practices like that because in my mind I practiced hard all the time or I played hard all the time, but that's not reality. How do you avoid that pitfall, John, as a parent?
The what pitfall? That just like the coaching in the car, or
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, just saying this space belongs to my child, right? And so if they want to talk about it, then they get to bring it up. And when they're done with the conversation, they get to put it to bed. So my daughter, she always would say, "Dad, like, how do you think I did?" Right? And I would always, or certainly later on, I got better at this of saying, like, no matter what, if she had a great game or a bad game or whatever, well, what went well today for you, Maggie, and what needs work, what didn't go as well today, and what'd you learn from today that you can focus on and practice this week? Three simple questions, right? Really easy. Best game, worst game. No matter how well you played, there's something to work on. No matter how poorly you played, there's there was something good. At least you remembered your shoes, and that's like, that's it. My son never brought it up. He never wanted to talk about it then. He wanted to eat, right? But then we had an agreement that we would talk about it at night or the next morning when the emotion was gone and you could have a rational conversation. And then he was ready to learn because certainly in soccer, I could teach him something. But, I mean, he was a boxer for a while, and I'm like, I couldn't teach him anything in boxing. I'm like, whoa, that looked like that hurt, you know? I mean, I think these are just the things that space belongs to them. They get to begin and end or not have the conversation. And if you really want to make an impact for your kids, then talk to them when they're actually ready to learn, whether it's there or whether it's someplace else. And I think, the only exception, if they did something that is just not okay for your family, right? Cursed at a referee, spit at someone that you saw, whatever. I'm just making punch someone. That's not okay. That's not how we do things. And we're going to address that now, not as a segue into discussing how you played, but just that's never going to be okay because that's not how we do things in our family.
You mentioned both of your children there. It sounds like they both played soccer, at least for a while. Your son did some boxing. What has been your approach as a parent in terms of exposure and multi-sport and their own sporting journeys?
Yeah, when they were young, we tried to let them do lots of different things. We tried to, do our best for one sport a season. So they worked through different sports and whatever. And my daughter was kind of, I'll try anything. And my son was like, I'm not quite sure I want to do anything until he knew he could do it pretty well. And I live in Bend, Oregon, which is a wonderful place for many other athletic pursuits that are not organized sports. So, both my kids, eventually chose soccer as like a main high school sport and a club sport, but they're both very good at snow sports, skiing and snowboarding. My son's a big mountain biker. And like I said, he did some boxing and loves the weight room and that. And my daughter, her senior year, decided to play some high school tennis and went off to college and, play beach volleyball. Right. And joined the ski team or the free ride team. So it's like they have all these. They're both healthy athletes with the ability to do lots of different things and be athletes for life, which was always the goal because neither of them had the drive to say, I want to go play college soccer. Right. And we also didn't really live in a great place to do that. When your closest away game is 3 hours away, it's not really an environment conducive to being a super high level soccer player, but you can certainly do a lot of other things. So, yeah, we just wanted them to be healthy athletes for life. And so far, so good.
Well, that's great to hear. And I think that's what people want in the long run. I think they just lose their way a little bit because of the current sporting environment we live in. And you talked about seasonal sports and you did your best to try to adhere to that. I think most parents out there, if you sit them down, rational, isolated moment, they get that. They probably subscribe to that. And then when push comes to shove, well, the other kids are playing this sport for another season and they're the friends. It's that fear of missing out. It's the FOMO. And I do think that parents feel both overwhelmed and somewhat powerless on that treadmill of youth sports that continues to churn on. What is your best advice to those parents as they approach those decisions and have those pressures?
I certainly recognize and respect that feeling of, I think your word is great, right? Powerlessness. Like we have no choice. If we want to continue on, we are told we have to do this, this, and this. So I think do your research, right? Like most of us probably do more research finding a plumber than we do our kids' coach or sports club, right? So do your research, see if their their website that says, well, we believe in multi-sport athletes is real or fake. Understand that you have to make certain commitments, right? So some clubs might say we promote multi-sport athletes, but we also have seasons where we need this to be your priority, right? So don't make your kid this multi-season multi-sport athlete and you can't commit to anything. So just being really really mindful of where you sign them up, of the coaches, that yeah, you might not have a choice who the coach is, but you do have a choice whether to continue with that coach. If that coach is if that coach is difficult and challenging, whatever, great. Can we learn what's good about this? What can we learn? Versus that coach is dangerous, is a bully, is horrible, is hurting my kid. Yeah, I'm not going to sign them back up for that. I don't care how many people he or she says they've sent on to college sports or whatever. Like not at the expense of damaging my kid physically and psychologically and all that sort of stuff. So doing your best. And I just think as a parent, like think of yourself as the general contractor, right? You are the only one who sees all the things that your son or your daughter is doing. All these coaches could be great coaches and all the environment could be great, but it doesn't mean it's not too much. And you're the only one who gets to decide this is too much. We need a day off. We need not to go to that thing. And then finally, I think communicate well with that coach, build trust, respect the fact that they have a hard job to do. And 99% of coaches do have your kid's best interest in mind. So, if 6 months out, hey, it's grandma's 90th birthday, we're going to be gone next August on this date. We're just letting you know 6 months out, right, that we're not going to be there, and we'll let you know again. That's fine, right? You can't every Thursday go, oh, we decided to go camping this weekend, so we're not going to the game. That's not fine. That's not okay. That's not fair to the other kids. That's not fair to your kid, and that's not fair to the coach. But if 6 months out, a coach says, you know what, we have a tournament that weekend, and you have to decide what's more important, grandma's 90th birthday or this tournament, I think that says a lot about how that coach values your child, which is very little.
I'm really glad you brought up communication between coaches and parents because it's a massive gap that I see right now where coaches, you're right, they have a hard job. And so one of the ways they commiserate with each other is talking about all the parent problems and who has more parent problems. And I think parents do the same thing. They get together after the game or on weekends and they talk about how their kid's coach doesn't know anything. And if they did, they'd see that my kid should be playing here. And unfortunately, these two groups don't talk to each other enough. Because you've coached for a long time, what does respectful communication from a parent look like to you as a coach, John?
I think, first of all, as a coach, I have to outline appropriate boundaries. So, where and when and how is an appropriate time for us to communicate if there's something wrong. And in the parking lot after a hard emotional game is not going to be an okay time. Number two, give each other the benefit of the doubt, right? So don't always assume a coach's worst motives, right? It's amazing. Like I've done this a long time. I coached for 30 years, right? But my last thing I was running a little program for 7, 8, 9 year olds. Be amazed how many times I turned to a kid and said, "All right, Scott, go back in," and Scott's like, "Nope, not going in." Right? As that parent, you can't run over there being like, why didn't you put my kid in? Right now, I would be more proactive and be like, hey, go get your dad, go get your mom. Be like, hey, listen, I'm not quite sure what's going on. I tried to put Scott in and he didn't want to go in. I don't know if he's scared. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he's sick. Right. But you'd just be amazed how often that happens. So don't assume, oh my God, coach is letting my kid rot on the bench. No, coach, trying to put your kid in. Your kid doesn't want to go in. Right. So, as a coach, I should outline philosophy and expectations and all of this ahead of time. Then, as a parent, adhere to those things, right? And just be like, hey, can we have a quick conversation? Just not quite sure what happened there. I mean, I've sat there in a soccer game trying to get a kid in, and it's 7 minutes before a ball goes out of bounds, right? And you're like, or you have a substitution rule that has to be your throw in or your goal kick or something, right? And you're like, I'm trying, I'm trying to get them in, you know, so it's like, don't be a parent who's like, oh, you said 25 minutes of playing time and it was only 24 minutes and 10 seconds. Like, come on, that kind of stuff, but as a coach, I should have, I should give kids meaningful playing time. Younger ones, yes, equal to the best of my ability. And then later on, yeah, meaningful. And then in high school varsity, no, you earn it, right? You're not entitled to it. So all these things, but I think it just goes down, like you said, it's good communication, some trust. As a coach, I have to build trust in with parents by connecting and seeing their kid. And as a parent, you have to trust me that I have the best interest of your kid in mind. And if we do that, it's probably going to be fine. And now we're both working together because our ultimate goal is that your kid has a great experience.
Well, and this brings up that conversation that we're all human and parents should know this, but we're not always going to get it right. Coaches aren't always going to get it right, and they can be upfront about that. But what is the motivation and what is the underlying philosophy and what they are trying to do? That is the most important thing because whether it's player selection in a game or whether it's tiering, which is something I wanted to bring up with you as well, which seems to happen at a younger and younger age, almost year by year, it seems to get younger. That doesn't always get it right. But it's not, I don't think, because of motivation that is ill founded. I think coaches are trying to get it right when they tier kids and they say, well, these are the best players right now. What does responsible tiering look like to you, John? And at what age do you feel it's appropriate?
we talked about it a little bit before, this idea of as many as possible, as long as possible, in the best environment possible. So, I've had discussions with some of the best talent development people in the world, and there's no consensus on that question. So, what I have sort of come to is like here's a perfect example. That last program of 50 kids, 7, 8, and 9 year olds, boys and girls that I ran, the girls, half of the program approximately, the best player and the weakest player were not that far apart. So we made even teams rather than putting one team in a top division and a second in the second. We made even teams, and we said, how can we best develop all these kids together, as a group, and we mixed them more in training. With the boys, while we would have mixed stuff, we said, man, maturity, competitive level, size, it's so far apart that if we don't tier these kids, the bottom kids are having a terrible experience and the top kids are having a terrible experience, right? So we're tiering, but what I think we really have to do is that can't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we need, because I think I can speak to soccer, if you have 30 kids, you probably have 8 to 10 that are definitely A and 8 to 10 that are definitely B, and you've got 10 in the middle. And if someone grows, someone really develops, they might the jump. You can't just say, nope, you're gone, see you in a year, and relegate them to a bad coach, different facility, or whatever. So I think as an organization, if I'm tiering, I also want to give kids opportunity. So at the end of my coaching, when I coach my own kids' teams, my daughter was a B team kid because she was a really late developer until she was 15, 16. Then she made the jump to the A team when she finally grew. But I said, I'll coach if I can coach both teams. Kids were welcome to do double practices. In the beginning, we practiced twice together and once apart. And at the end, we were practicing once together and twice apart. But I wanted to catch up the bottom half of the group that was so far behind, and they all needed a lot of work. But I would say, yeah, you want to come to the A team practice? Sure. I don't care. I'll coach 24 kids out here. So the kid who was hungry and was doing extra, they got better. And the kid who was happy to be on the B team, that was fine. But what also happened then was a lot of the A team kids said, can I stay for the B team practice? Right? Because I just want to play more. Right. And now when I needed a guest player on the B team, everyone's like, I'll go, I'll play. It wasn't like, oh my God, they just asked my kid to play for the B team. Are they cutting them? Are they moving them down? Like there was no fear from the parents. It was just an opportunity to play more soccer. And who that really helps is the tweeners, the kids who are close. And what was really cool was that group that I coached for 3 years, I passed them on, and at under 16 or under 17, they were in the state final in Oregon, and 6 or 7 of the 16 or 18 kids in the roster were B team kids when I started, right? They moved up, they made the jump because they weren't relegated permanently for what they were at 12. And many of those kids, like my daughter, they were late birth year kids. They were September, October, November. They were just small, but they became some of the best players later on.
Well, what you described, I think, is the way it really should work, that it should be a fluid situation. That while we're taking a step in a different direction right now with which team or tier you're in, that those roads need to intertwine again. And I do believe that part of the FOMO with parents right now is that their belief, and maybe in some cases it's well founded, their belief is if my kid doesn't get on that highway, there's no on ramp at a later date. I'm a firm believer that if your kid grows, if your kid emerges, if your kid decides at 14 that's something that he or she really wants to invest in and has the talent and the ability to do it, people will find that person. But I understand the fear from parents on the other side. How do they determine whether their organization is doing it this way, John?
I mean, I think you determine it by talking to people who are in the organization and paying attention. right? Like if your kid is the best kid on the B team and never gets a chance to even go to practice with the A team, I think that's an appropriate thing to go ask the coach and ask the club, hey, is this something that he or she, can get an opportunity to do? They're really dedicated. They're doing extra stuff. They want a chance to move up. Why are they stuck here for now? And if they're like, because that's the how we picked it in May, and you just have to wait till next May, it's not really a development environment. Now, every once in a while, I think governing bodies are getting better, but every once in a while, I mean, I've been part of state associations that didn't allow that. They didn't allow roster fluidity. They didn't allow guest players within a club to go do stuff. And they usually didn't allow it because of the small percentage of bad actors who would take the best kids and play them down so their fourth division team could win its game and move up. Like, well, then suspend that coach, right? Or suspend that club, but don't punish all the other kids who really deserve this fluidity, because it's just short-sighted. So as a parent, I should be able to see, but I think the big thing is as well, as long as I see that if my kid is getting good coaching and they're in an environment that's competitive for them and they're thriving, that's not a terrible thing. That's a great thing when they're 10, 11, 12. Don't panic, right? I would much rather my kid be on the B team, playing most of the minutes, being one of the better players, than sitting on the bench on the A team playing 20 minutes a game. That's not how they're going to get better.
Well, and you've said this, and I've said this, the research that we've seen, whether it's from the Aspen Institute in the States or from Jumpstart State of Play here in Canada, kids would rather play and lose than sit and win. It's very clear, and parents need to keep that in mind. It's not about you going around town telling everybody your kid was on a championship team. It's about their experience.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. And the way you said it is absolutely perfect. I want my kid to play. I remember when my daughter went to her first sort of whatever it was, U11 tryout, and it was the age when US soccer flipped all from a school year birth year to a calendar year. And my daughter was on the B team, and that's exactly where she belonged. And I was the first one in line to sign the paperwork because that's where she belonged. I'm not afraid of that. And I remember some parents afterwards said, we noticed that. We were disappointed for our kids, but we noticed that you were like, great, here we go. Right. And so I just think that as parents, if you can take the long view and say, well, what's good about this? Now, if you can't think of a single thing that's good about it, yeah, maybe you're in the wrong place. But what's good about this realistically? More playing time, more responsibility, more self-confidence, because your kid's going to feel like, wow, I'm pretty good here, because we only look at the bucket we play in, the pond we swim in. Then that's a good thing. Maybe not forever, but it's a good thing right now.
John, we've touched on so many tangible takeaways for parents within the course of this conversation and so many of the realities that they're facing. We can't get to them all because there's just so many issues around youth sports, but I do think that parents should understand what you do for a living. You are called to go around the world and speak different countries, different organizations, different federations. I'm curious to know what problem they are most often wanting to solve or get to by bringing you in.
I think it's pretty similar everywhere I go. And yeah, in the last couple months, I've been from Singapore and Indonesia to France and all over the US. And, it's very similar. And what I would say, it would be, how do we help parents understand the journey, right? And behave appropriately? How can we help coaches develop people skills so that they can connect with their athletes and engage parents, right? And how can our organization, our school, with schools a lot, it's developing team captains. How can we develop leadership within kids? Yeah, but how can we best support our coaches and parents and athletes? It's always some version of one of those three things. And I always tell people when I get on an airplane and sit next to you, Scott, and people ask me what I do, and I tell them no one's ever said, Oh, that's weird. Never heard of that issue, right? If they have kids, like, oh my God, you should come to my kid's school, right? And that's what, so that's over and over. Yeah, I hear that. So yeah, it's a big issue, but I truly appreciate the schools and clubs and governing bodies that I've gotten to work with who are saying, but we can do something about this. We can move the needle. And so I love doing it. And now that my kids are off at college, I don't feel, I'm actually traveling a bit more because I don't feel the pull to be back home to watch their games.
You mentioned a bunch of different places where kids can access sport, but I do want to end on this access to sport. And it does appear to be a growing concern because of not only the cost, but the time commitment. You mentioned facilities earlier in this conversation. How concerned are you about the access to sport for all socioeconomic classes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge thing. Sport is becoming this playground for the upper middle class and not the place where every kid, where it's a meritocracy, where everyone has a chance to compete based on their ability. And I think this is really because we've pushed excessive costs and commitments down younger and younger and younger. It's understandable that maybe in high school, middle school, even these things become more, but we certainly don't need 6-year-old, 7-year-old soccer players being forced to purchase a $300 uniform package and backpack and sweatsuit, right? They need a round thing in a semi-flat space, and we're making it unreachable for so many people. And it's just really sad. Yes, organizations have costs and facilities to pay for, and coaches and referees and league fees. Right? It has to cost something. We're not Europe where our governments are funding all this stuff and we can say, hey, it's $30. But we also have opportunities as organizations to make decisions of what do our grassroots players really need, which is, probably a simple shirt and a pair of shorts, and go buy some white socks. We'll see you out there. How can we keep this as affordable and accessible as possible?
Well, and that's been your mission since you got this going and trying to make it fun for everyone, most importantly, the children. John, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation. We'll certainly link to the resources that people can access you and some of the work you've done as well. Thanks for being an OG in this space and helping people like me get into it so we can all shout from our megaphones.
My kids would agree that I'm an OG, that's for sure. So thanks so much, Scott. Thanks so much for the work you do and for having me on this show and for spreading the good word and helping parents out. I truly appreciate all you do as well.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.